morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski. And folks, we have the first person who ever hit a three-time episode, who is now on for their fourth-time episode, the one and only king of popcorn pricing, Belal Batrawy. Nick, why should people listen?
So we've talked a lot about like pricing, proposals, etc., but I think this episode and Bilal gets into the psychology and the pricing strategy better than any guest that we've had on the show. And so we talk about when to share pricing and the strategy around that. We also get into how you should be structuring your pricing. And so if you're somebody that has multiple different like tiers of your pricing, I promise you that if you listen to this episode, you will learn things that make you more commission and get customers to buy bigger deals from you with less effort on your end. All right, Bilal, welcome back to the show. I hope you remember we start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways. So let's get your 3.
All right. My first is going to be never get asked what the price is. If you're doing that, then you are acting like an amateur seller, not a professional seller. The reality is you have to bring up pricing first. It's very important that you do so. That's how professional sellers act, and you have to be smart about it. So the way you do it is this. You give people a floor, and then you give them a range. It might sound something like, listen, our pricing starts at $18,000. That's where it begins. But typically for companies of your size, it's around 34 to 56,000. There's a couple factors that go into that range, but before I go on, just curious, what's your initial reaction to those numbers? And by doing so, you prompt a very healthy conversation. They're going to say something like, wow, that's way more than I thought. And you're going to say, why? And then they might say something like, oh, that's what I thought it might be. And you're going to say, why? Because either way, you want to know what they think about pricing early, because serious buyers need to know what the price is.
Beautiful. What's number 2?
The second one's going to be there's no such thing as a professional buyer. I think a lot of sellers make this mistake where they think because they're talking to someone senior, they know how to buy. The truth is our buyers don't go to school for buying. They don't take a course for buying. Unless you're talking to a professional procurement or someone like that, they don't buy. Buying is just a subset of their job. Even if they bought tools in the past, they have a day job. They have a lot of other responsibilities. So never make that assumption. At some point, you as a seller have to bring up some of the things regarding price, around implementation and time required, resources and people needed, and the deliverables and commitment from both their end and yours. By doing so, you're taking control of the sale and acting like the professional seller.
Round us out. What's number 3?
Stop trying to be clever. I feel like too many sellers clever themselves out of deals. It's wild to me. The reality is when somebody asks you a question during a deal cycle or even a cold call, and it's very specific, you should really take a pause for a moment. And the first thought should not be to answer the question. So it's very healthy when somebody asks you a specific question to realize that they're thinking of a particular situation or individual or problem that they have, and you need to uncover that. And you might not be able to uncover that in any other time except when they're asking that question. So when you get asked the question, do you blank or how does this work or whatever, take a pause and say, out of curiosity, what makes you ask? I can answer that question, but I'm just curious. What makes you ask?
You mentioned that you want to be the one who mentions price first, or you want to be the person who explains price first. When in your sales cycle are you typically explaining price?
Early and often. So the mistake that sellers make is they think negotiation is a stage because it's put there in their CRM or something like that. Negotiation starts with a buyer right from the beginning, just like discovery does. So you want to bring up pricing pretty early, and you want to find out, A, can that person handle that price? Because the person you might be speaking to just doesn't have the budget or authority. That's not their pay grade to talk about that sort of stuff. And when you do that, then you're inviting them to bring in others who do have that pay grade to talk about that budget cost. So you want to do it early. And worst case scenario, you find out they can't pay, and great, you just save yourself an entire sales cycle with somebody who could never find the money to pay you in the first place. So it's something you want to be bringing up early and often.
Are there exceptions to this rule? I'm thinking of a scenario when I used to sell to law firms. And I remember once I was selling a deal to a firm and we got an inbound request from a legal intern there, or like a legal marketing manager, which was weird because normally we would sell to like the managing partner or the CFO of the law firm. And I remember talking to this person and I followed your advice and I told them, hey, it starts this. Response was, wow, that's what a car costs. And I'm like, yeah, this is like enterprise grade software. You're like a 700 attorney law firm. that's pretty cheap. And I think I screwed myself out of that deal because a person who was not equipped to say yes told me no. And I'm like, I guess I'm wondering, do you think I took the wrong approach there? Should I have tried to just get higher and give price to a different stakeholder? What advice would you give to Nick, the seller, a couple years ago?
I would say you did the right thing because you saw a red flag immediately. You just said most of the time the intern's not the one who's shopping. So
Yeah.
there was already a red flag, right? So buying happens in a pattern, it's not random. And when that pattern gets disrupted somehow, elite sellers, that's the spidey senses kick off. They realize that and they get frustrated, they get
Yeah.
annoyed. And so you want to get things that don't fit the pattern out of the way for the things that do.
Mm.
Why is the company sending an intern to do a buyer's job?
Yeah.
So I think you scaring that intern away with the pricing was probably a smooth move because the fact that they already had started on the wrong foot with you in the
Mhm.
buying process is probably a red flag.
So you talk about bringing up price as early as possible. I guess, does that mean we're talking first call, discovery call early? And if so, could you give a sense of where in the discovery call would this actually happen?
That part depends if it's a first call or a discovery call or during the demo or something like that. I think it depends a bit on the sophistication of your buyer. That's a factor in there. And typically how big your deals can get. Naturally, if you're talking about multi-million dollar deals, pricing is not expected in the first call. That's not even the norm for that type of a sale.
Mhm.
But if you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, I don't see why you need to hold that card close to your chest. You
Mhm.
need to make sure you're speaking to the right person that has the pay grade to approve that kind of amount. And if you're not, and you're sitting there demoing them and discovering them and doing all these great things with them, and then you find out down the line your 50K quote is 40K above their budget. And now you have to redo that entire process with a one person or two people above them in the ladder. What did we just do? I think for the majority of sellers, talking about pricing early in the first call makes sense. And then there's some situational things where it doesn't.
So could you talk about how you bring up price again? You talked about giving a place where it starts and then a range. How do you decide what those points are in your pricing matrix?
The starting point is the easiest one. Give people a floor so that they have expectations set on that. There is no scenario on the planet where they're going to go below that floor. If that's happening, then something's gone wrong, right? That deal shouldn't be with you. You shouldn't be speaking to them. Something's gone horribly wrong in the communication. Now, the range is just your expertise. You have an idea how your ideal customers buy and what they typically pay for your segment or your industry or your product. Start with that range, and it doesn't have to be a tight range. It can be loose. It could be a big range. And you, again, you're alluding to the fact that there are factors that play into causing that range to go from a smaller number to a bigger number. But you want to anchor them with that floor, and you want to give them some pricing just off the bat. And where your wiggle room comes in as a seller is in those factors. Later on, you can mention, oh, I didn't realize you were going to add a different team, or you wanted a separate product. That's why we have that range. And now you're pushing up higher in the range, but you've set some expectations and you've already started the negotiation in a sense.
As it relates to the accuracy of that floor that you share, as well as the range, you used the price figure of 18K being the floor. Are there scenarios that you would recommend saying the floor is a little bit higher than that, knowing that they're going to try to work you down anyway? As it relates to the strategy of the numbers you present, is there any recommendations you would give to folks?
I would say pick a floor that is slightly intimidating. The idea is that, again, we're starting the negotiation a bit and we need to figure out a couple things. Number one, is this what they were expecting? What were their expectations? Because, again, there's no professional buyers out there. They probably didn't know what it cost, or they're benchmarking off something that you need to course correct them on. Like they have some sort of anchor point that maybe their current provider gave them or a
Mhm.
competitor of yours did or some number that they heard from somebody else. And it's like, whoa, 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 we're not playing that game. Okay, I'll let you know exactly what it is. So that's the first thing. The second thing, again, we need to figure out really quickly, can this person pull this off? Because I don't want to sell to somebody who can't buy. If they are an influencer or just a champion, but not the decision maker, the difference between average and elite sellers is their access to power. The way you get access to power is you talk about problems relevant to that level of power.
Mhm.
So if I talk about executive level problems at executive level price, eventually I'm going to get an executive on the phone. If I'm talking about junior level problems at a junior level price, I'm going to have someone junior on the phone. So if you want to be the type of seller that works up to power, you need to talk, and pricing is part of that. When you command a higher price, you're going to be pulling in bigger stakeholders with bigger titles. Negotiation doesn't just start at some random point. You start bringing in numbers because you need to get a feel for the room. You could still have a qualified buyer that maybe does have that budget, but was not expecting to pay that amount. Now you have a business case to build versus they tell you, well, you know what? We haven't even started our budgeting for next year. I can see this being included. Great. At the end of the day, people can't just conjure up money. As much as like we've been told that by sales gurus, the truth is people do have limitations on budget. We want to work within them. So you can start that process by you putting out the number first. It's like when you go to a car dealer, as much as we don't like the experience, they do give you a sticker price. There's some sort of benchmark to say, I know I can't afford a Ferrari. I know I need to go to the Honda dealer because the Ferrari dealer let me know that those products are out of my price range.
Yeah.
We need to set expectations like that.
Belal, this reminds me of when we had the CEO of Gong, Amit Bendoff, on the show, and he talked about this concept of bigger does not mean slower. A lot of people think that bigger deals take a longer time to close, but sometimes by quoting high, oftentimes what you'll do is you'll actually accelerate the deal because they need to get power involved earlier. That 30 Minutes to President's Club, there was a time where we were selling 20K sponsorships, and now our minimum price is usually 50K and above.
Yeah.
And if there's ever a customer who wants to buy a 20K deal from the past, those are the deals that take the longest, they take the most scrutiny, because you're oftentimes dealing with the nitpicky below the line buyers versus the people who are focused on the vision and executive level priorities and are willing to give you an overwhelming, emphatic yes for a 100K proposal.
Let's assume that buyers okay with that range that you've given and you've shared, hey, here's the factors that are going to allow us to get a bit more specific with the final proposal or the quote that we put in front of you. Let's fast forward to that proposal call that you have with your prospect. Talk to me about what a great proposal call looks like.
We're going to use social psychology and rely on the science that we know on how people buy. Numbers are very subjective. We like to think they're objective, but they're extremely subjective. That's why we see pricings in the 99s instead of 00, because there's a lot of psychology to how you price. And one of the techniques that I teach, that I know you guys are familiar with, is popcorn pricing. The idea on how we can manipulate or essentially create value just by simply lining up one item next to another. One is, for example, Rolls-Royce. They used to sell their cars at car shows, and a $250,000 car at a car show seems just like extremely insane, like completely overpriced compared to the $30,000 and $40,000 models that are on the floor. So they stopped exhibiting at car shows and they started exhibiting at what? Private air shows. So all of a sudden, a $250,000 car next to a $25 million jet looks like a fun little purchase versus some huge expensive cost. So what we put our pricing next to impacts how we think about it. And I like to use popcorn pricing from the movie theater. The idea of the small, medium, and large, that small popcorn that looks like my 7-year-old, it's like the sippy cup that he used to use. It's like that. Then the medium popcorn, which is probably the right amount for a human being to consume. And then the large popcorn, which could feed a family of 4 and it gets a free refill. And somehow the large popcorn is just $1 more than the medium, and the medium is just $1 more than the small. And all of a sudden, that large popcorn looks like a crazy good deal. But they tricked us because they jacked up the price of the small popcorn. They anchored us at a high price point. So we were already in the mindset of, well, I'm starting at $7. There's no scenario where I walk out of here without popcorn for $7. Might as well fork up the $9.50 and get that large with a free refill, even though I'm not going to eat that much popcorn.
I end up falling victim to this all the time. Every time I go to the movies with my wife, I end up eating probably 1,800 calories worth of buttery, greasy deliciousness because I always go for the XXL popcorn. What should the price differential be? If I have a small, a medium, and a large package maybe of the software that I sell, how might I consider pricing item A, B, and C? Maybe you can give real dollar figures.
Let's translate popcorn pricing to how we position in B2B. So your small popcorn is essentially your list price with no discounts, no upgrades, no changes, just that horrible, terrible, made of steel number that your buyer is definitely not going to pay and you don't expect them to. And essentially, the psychology tells us we should only present 2 options, maximum 3, when we give somebody a decision. Because as soon as we start offering too many options, the complexity of the decision actually lowers our IQ. It makes us dumb. We have too many things to choose from. So you give people a maximum of 3 options, but ideally only 2. Okay, which is the medium and the large. So in that world, it's here's something that you were looking for. So that my list price is, let's say, $150 per user per month on an annual plan, no discounts, no add-ons whatsoever. That's my small. That's my first column in my pricing. The column next to it says, now for you nice folks, I can discount that from 150 to 130. So a nice healthy discount. And on top of it, I can reduce the implementation costs by $2,000 in the first year if you sign a 1-year agreement. Nice. Not bad. Okay. Now, option B, the large popcorn. I can take it down to $120 a user per month on a 2-year agreement and waive the implementation fee on both years and add our integration with blank product. And if I offer you that, that's a discount of this much plus the upgrade of the integration pack on the house. And now you're getting them to commit to a very large dollar amount and a 2-year agreement. And you created value. That difference between the list price, which is the anchor, which you knew they were never going to pick, and that option A, which is good, but that option B, which is like, whoa, that's really good. And the price difference between A and B isn't that much. I might as well pony up that extra money, lock in this price for 2 years, get those discounts on the implementation, and get that integration pack. It sounds like a great deal of fun. And I'm going to look like a genius that I hosed this seller. And little do they know, you set it up so that you win, whether they pick the first option or the second.
Could you talk about some of these levers other than the price itself that go into pricing? And the reason for that is you're using a combination of discounts, free products, integrations, and all of these different things to sweeten the deal and make it feel like an overwhelming grand slam offer. What are the different levers that I should use in my popcorn pricing?
This is where we start getting into how we act as professional sellers, and we're not going to be amateurs. There are fixed things that we can offer, and there are perceived value items that we can offer. What I mean by that is, again, let's do the popcorn example. At the movie theater, that free refill on the large popcorn, 1 free refill, that's them giving you an upgrade. It doesn't cost them anything. The popcorn's already popped, but we feel like that's such a win. Now, the significant majority of people that buy that popcorn will never go back for a refill because they won't even finish the first one. But it feels like a win. So you have things that don't cost you anything to offer, but your buyer puts a value on it. Airlines do this a lot too with the boarding a little bit early. You're still getting on the plane. Nothing changed. But the fact that you went from zone 6 to zone 4, you pony up an extra $20 for that. That's an upgrade. So we're talking about 2 distinct things that you called out, Armin. One is the savings. So I can save you on the hard costs of the product. That's a discount per user. That's slashing the price of certain things. And then there's upgrades I can throw your way that don't cost me anything, but you find perceived value. I can put a dollar amount to them. So for example, if it's as simple as adding a few admin seats, well, admin seats don't cost anything anyway, but my buyer doesn't know that. So I can say admin seats usually cost $20. I'll waive the admin seats and give you 15 on the house. So now that feels like an upgrade. You're not only saving me on the hard cost of the product itself, we have to do a little bit of discounting when we try to get multi-year deals or we're trying to get a buyer to consume more. And we're trained on that. We understand that. But the other part that most sellers miss is the upgrades. The things that your buyer finds valuable, you can put a dollar amount to. You still give it away for free. But by putting that dollar amount, you sweeten the deal. It just sounds better.
If you're listening to this episode and you want to roll this out for your own sale, you need to think about what are the things that you can give away for free that your buyer values that you can put in the medium or ideally the large popcorn to steer your buyer in that direction. I know for the things that I've sold in the past, probably the biggest place that I've found these free items that help steer them towards the bigger package is in what happens with implementation and with customer success. Oftentimes, there are things that your implementation team is going to be doing or your CS team will be doing that they're doing for every customer, but your buyer gets a lot of value from. One example, when I sold ERP software to law firms, we would have a session during their product implementation where our reporting team would advise on, hey, here are the most common financial reports that our law firm customer base of 300 law firms looks at. You might want to consider setting these up. And I was able to sell a reporting advisory consulting session in the bigger packages, which every customer was going to get. But the ones who went towards the bigger ones, they knew they were getting that and they were looking forward to it. And they saw a lot of value in that. So that's one example that I've used. Armand, I don't know if you have any from like Pave or Cardo when you sold there.
You got to think about the ones that matter to you and don't matter as much to your prospect.
Mhm.
And then you have to think about the things that really don't matter to you, but they matter a lot to the prospect. And so there were basic things like, could we slot you in with a dedicated implementation manager? Could we give you waived implementation, but we got paid 50% on implementation fees or things like that? Or oftentimes, even if we didn't plan on charging implementation fees, we would throw it in there so we could use it as a carrot to take away. Just
Mhm.
because you don't get paid on it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be inside of your existing proposal.
So a couple other examples of where you can find these upgrades to give that aren't just discounts, right? That aren't just like hard savings. If somebody's looking at a 2-year agreement, you can say price lock. The cost of your product going up year over year, let's say your price typically goes up 3 to 7%. So you take what it costs for an annual agreement, multiply by that 3 to 7%, and you're telling them, I will lock you in for 2 years. Now you get price lock on year 2. You just saved that 3 to 7% of the total agreement. Another thing we used to do, Full Story, which was a session replay tool, we had the number of sessions you want to record, how long you want to store them for, and then user access. Those were the hard costs. Now, the way I found an upgrade was I used to say, okay, I found out that we can offer a little bit of a buffer on how many sessions we record before we hard stop. Now, that wasn't listed. So what I tell people is, again, on the medium popcorn, it's a hard stop. As soon as you hit your limit, it's done. But on the large popcorn, I'll throw in a 15% buffer on the house so that if you ever go over, it still keeps recording for you. Now, that was already baked into our cost, so it cost me nothing to offer that. But I could put a dollar amount to that 15% overage because that costs something to the buyer. At least it's perceived value to them. Another one we used to do at Clearbit was we would mention that the two-way integration. I would say that's available on the deluxe plan, that option B, the large popcorn. And if you're buying just a single product, we don't typically offer the two-way integration. So all of a sudden, people put a lot of value in that. They say, well, no, I definitely want to make sure I do that. And now it makes sense why I need to look at multiple products so that I'm maximizing that value. So you can find these upgrades. Where is the place that I'm giving stuff away? I just need to add a dollar amount to it. Now all of a sudden it's an upgrade. I don't need to charge for it. I just put a dollar amount to it and I show that in the pricing as waived. And I say that's an upgrade for you on the B, the large popcorn, that second option. That's the more attractive one compared to the first option and then list price.
So, Belal, I have a question which is around the demeanor or the manner in which you're communicating this pricing information. Because we're just here on the show and you're pretty friendly, being like, and I'm going to throw this thing in. It's going to be great. Boom, you get extra session replays, whatever. But one of the things that you told me on the pre-show is that you believe most salespeople are way too nice, and they think that being nice is what wins them deals. And you were like, actually, the best sellers are jerks. They're curt. How are you communicating these almost preemptive discounts in a way that isn't lowering your status and giving away your leverage in a future negotiation?
Status comes from credibility. If my buyer views me as credible, then I get status immediately. If my buyer views me as uncredible, then I'm at a real disadvantage for the rest of the deal. And your ability to get access to power and executives is a direct correlation to how much credibility you have. That's why you talk about these things around how people buy your product early and upfront. Taking command of these things that you know are part of the buying process, are part of that pattern on how people buy, makes you credible, makes you a professional, separates you from the amateurs. So when you go to present this pricing, At this point, you've earned some level of credibility. You've gotten to some point with them where they're saying, now show me the goods.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do this, like you said, to the demeanor of how you're supposed to be doing it, it's very matter of fact. I'm not here to try to sell them at this point. The selling is done. The negotiation began early. What I'm about to show them is not a surprise. It's very much similar to the numbers that we talked about back in meeting one or back in the demo. So they know what's coming. But what they don't realize is I've layered in all these treats, all these special things for them in that second option. And now I get to be the nice guy and be like, by the way, I can hook you up. I know you weren't expecting me to hook you up, but I can. And those hookups add up. That's a lot of money I can hook you up with in bonuses and upgrades and savings because you've been so good to me so far. And so now all of a sudden negotiation isn't this battle and it's not this point of friction. It's more like, hey, where do you want to land? No matter where you land here, I win and you're going to feel like a winner too because look what you're getting out of this deal. This is going on around us. We're already trained like Pavlovian dogs to understand this, to recognize this, to do this. But we don't apply this to B2B for some reason. We get all technical on pricing, hold it close to our chest, surprise them at the end, find out they don't have budget, and then we're in a battle negotiating about price. Take control right from the beginning, know who your buyers are, get that access to power because you're talking at the price point is at the buyer level. And now when you show them pricing, it's not some bomb. They're like, oh, okay, this is exactly what he said. Look at that. There's the floor and there's the range. And that one's a little bit on the higher end and that one's on the lower end, but that one's stacked with value and that one's not. I like that one, sir. I'll take that.
Belal, we are running out of time, and I got to make it to the movie theater because for some reason I got a hankering for popcorn during this episode. Final question is this. We've talked about a lot of really great things salespeople should be doing, and now I got to ask you about the inverse, which is a shouldn't. What is one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
Have you noticed when a buyer shares a problem or an issue going on in the business, and then the seller says, perfect? Like they say it under their breath or something. You're just like, dude, you just said perfect to their problem. Could you sound any more like a wolf in sheep's clothing, like ready to pounce and attack them? Don't say perfect. When somebody says, yeah, we've had an issue with inbound leads, or yeah, we have some bottlenecks on our ticketing, and especially when we have tier 2 tickets, and then the rep goes, perfect. That's not the response. The response is like, oh, really? How did that happen? We're going to get that curiosity going of like, why is that going on? I'm surprised to hear you say that. Why would that be going on? Or I'm not surprised you said that. I hear that often, but why is that going on with you? That should be the response, not perfect.
Great. Well, this was a perfect episode. Everybody stick around for a perfect 60-second recap coming up soon.
Alrighty, Nick, it is time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Belal. What do you have for your 2?
So number 1 is when you're presenting pricing options, you should be presenting a maximum of 3 options. If you share more than 3, you're actually going to overwhelm them with too many decisions. And it might seem like it's making it easier for them to make a decision because there's more variety. You actually make it harder. So if you have more than 3 options, pare down and only offer the 3 that you think are relevant to your prospect. Number 2. One of the best ways to steer your prospect towards a larger package is by thinking about the things that they value that don't cost you anything to offer. Those might be things related to implementation. Maybe you say it's $2,500, but you waive it for the bigger tier. Maybe it's something like an extra instance of your software. Maybe it's something related to what's included in the professional services or implementation of what you do. Think about the things that your prospect values that don't cost you anything and use those to steer them to higher tiers.
When you get asked for price, or better yet, when you bring up price early on in your sales cycle, always start by giving a floor number so you don't scare them away, and then give them a range of where they will probably land based on 3 or 4 factors so you have room to adjust in the future. And then lastly, number 4, if you're trying to sell a Rolls Royce, don't put your Rolls Royce right next to a Honda Civic at a car show. Put the Rolls Royce right next to the jet that costs 25 million bucks. The way that plays out in software pricing is your first column might be the standard list pricing that you quoted them that they threw out the window that they know they're not going to pay for. And then you might put one offer that seems okay. And then you might take your premium offer and stuff it with a lot of those things that you might not care about, but they care about,
Hmm.
but make it close enough to the okay offer that it makes sense for them to make a leap to buy just a little bit more. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
I've got two things for people today. Thing number one is if you're thinking about visualizing some of what we talked about on the show, Belal put together a resource. It's free. It's in the show notes. Go check it out. It will give you some of his best practices for sharing pricing and the strategy around this stuff. We also, you and me, Armand, put together a 30 Minutes to President's Club live tactic teardown on best practices for how to negotiate a deal. Because oftentimes, even when you do all of this stuff right, a very savvy buyer is still going to try to work you down. And we put together a step-by-step breakdown for how you should navigate a negotiation in a way that keeps your price where you want it to be and also gets your deal to close on your timeline and doesn't kick quarter over quarter over quarter. So both of those are in the show notes. Check them out. We'll see you next week on 30 Minutes to President's Club.